Hi, this is MJ from Lioness Publications, and we're here to continue part 2 of Katrina on the anniversary. In this case, we're going to start looking at the Louisiana state chart. And I do want to just come back a little bit to the last session. And I want to clarify that Louisiana, there was a question whether Louisiana had actually asked for help from the federal government. And I believe that's what the federal government was waiting for before actually providing help. Sort of the request to say, yes, can you send help? And I think Louisiana had assumed that it was just going to get help. So there was a lot of miscommunication. And I downplayed in the last session some of the Mars-Pluto things going on, because it did start to turn into some violence. There was there was shoplifting, there was looting going on, and people were getting somewhat, angry when they realized they were just being left with no food, no water, no way out. There was also anger because they were being told to evacuate, but they had no way to evacuate. So there are some points there that, I didn't really develop fully in the first one, and I'm still not going to develop them fully here because it's just so much. So I just want to touch on a lot of the things I would have said, yes, there's something happening. Okay, we need to be aware. So let's move on to Louisiana here. And what we have here is, first indication of something is Uranus squaring Mars. Now, this would have occurred just a few days before, maybe a week or so. And at that point, they would have been starting to track this hurricane and saying something's coming. And with Uranus here, it's saying change. What? And it's to action. So what was likely starting to happen here is that the teams there from the state or the city were going around to houses telling them to evacuate. So you were likely having some confrontations with police at that point. Police saying, you need to leave. People saying, we can't leave. We don't have any money. And it's sort of left at a point that it's not great. Now, we also have Jupiter coming up to make an inconjunct to Pluto. Jupiter is too much, over excesses. Pluto is the foundation. In a state, it would be things like the foundation that keeps that state going, the streets, the sewers, the water, all that. That's also the foundations in a city. At the state level, it could also be things like military response, or emergency response things. So it's all the things that would be considered a foundation for a state. In this case, there was too much, and it just overwhelmed whatever we had for the state resources. So now let's move on to the progression. On the progression, what we have is Mars in inconjunct to Sun. Mars is action. Sun is the identity. What happened there, and this is slightly after, what was happening there was probably beyond the realm of possibility for people living in Louisiana. They didn't realize that this could happen, that actions like this could actually come to their state, that people somehow acting, leaving people on roofs, not being able to get to them. So all these things not being successful. And seeing this even on TV, you wondered why they couldn't mobilize. And, people on TV wondering this. What about the people that were there? Granted, there were small teams that were mobilizing and trying to get things done. Now we have Mercury opposing Mercury. And again, this is likely the fact that they had planned for one thing, but then something else came along. They had planned that the assault would be frontal, but the assault ended up being on the backward side of the hurricane. So, again, not planned for. Opposition to what they were expecting. They went to bed thinking everything was okay. They wake up the next morning and they have mass flooding. Now let's take a look at the last one, which is the solar arc. And here what we have is we've got some Neptune angles. And Neptune is in conjunct to Uranus. Now, Neptune is things that are not understood, things that are foggy, can relate also to water. What is Uranus? Uranus is in a chart, technology, the ability to act quickly, bring technology in, get things fixed, innovate. So, in effect, the water, this is in conjunct, it's a break and adjust, wasn't allowing anything to work well. What happened was the water was breaking down, and I believe communications was severely impacted. So that means that type of infrastructure would have been damaged. We also had damage to things like roads. So if we look here, Neptune is squaring what? Pluto. This would be the foundation of that state. So things that, for example, the roads, the things that, the state is built on, in effect, in addition to the government. I mean, this would be a governmental type of piece. I mean, all of this overwhelmed them. The government was not able to respond. So this is bringing in not just the foundation, the physical, it's bringing in the government, the power in place at this point. Now we also have Mars making a conjunction to Neptune. Mars's action, Neptune, you're trying to act on something that is not solid, that in effect is watery, no boundaries. What happens is that your actions can't work. They're not meant for what the area is. So in effect, the actions they were doing was not going to work for the emergency that they were facing. Do I want to touch on anything else? No. I think that covers it for that one. So we can see from the Louisiana state chart that yes, there were things going on. Does it indicate the scope? Not necessarily. We've got it showing up in 3 charts, so we can see that something would be going on. Now, next we'll take a look at the city, the New Orleans chart, and see what that has to tell us about this whole piece. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.